Great. We're just sorting out a couple of technical issues here. And I will be with you in just a minute. But while we're logging in, we've got Jenny here and Lee that are also sitting waiting. And just, yeah, I welcome everybody to please give us a little bit of information about yourself in the chat box there. It's we've got people from all over the province and it'll be pretty exciting to see it. So give me just a second. Super. Okay, we have a number of people still logging in, but you know what? I'm going to get this started because we have a very big presentation to do, a lot of information. This is really exciting. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in on a really important topic and one that I've been pretty excited to have and be able to pull together. So a huge thank you to Lee, Jenny, and Barb for joining in with us today. We've got Jenny and Barb, both from the Boundary region. Jenny is 30 years in the Boundary, came as a child, and Barb grew up here. So really just that huge amount of knowledge for our region. And Lee has been working in riparian protection for, ooh, shucks, Lee, what did you say, 35 years. So just wealth of knowledge. And one of the big things that I'm asking is, you know, make sure that the more questions we have or that engagement and that conversation that we have with everybody, the more we learn. So it's together that we're going to be able to make this webinar as effective as we can. So as you can see, and I see so many people signing in on that chat box already, so thank you very much. It's really great for us to be able to understand where people are coming from and some of the goals that they're coming to with this type of a presentation. So I wanted to start off with acknowledging that this is acknowledging the First Nations and Indigenous influence on the Boundary region and the First Nation traditional history here in our Boundary watershed. I respectfully appreciate that the land on which many of us gather and on which is referenced throughout this webinar is a converging traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx, Secwepemc, Sinixt people, as well as the Métis people who have also touched these lands. And we're grateful to have this collective opportunity to share knowledge and information via this webinar from both the presenters and, like I said, from the attendees. One of the, let's change the slide there. We do have a lot of people from the whole province. I've heard people coming in from Fort St. John, from Campbell River, from over in the Stikine area. So I just wanted to quickly focus in on the Kettle River watershed. And so you can see here the RDKB is the red boundary, which is our regional district boundary for the Kootenay boundary region. And then that green outline is the Kettle River watershed. So this is sort of just that bit of that picture as to where we are, Grand Forks, Midway, Greenwood area. I will do a really quick look. I see a lot of people have already found the chat box just down here at the far corner. And as we move through some of the questions, we do have that opportunity to be able to unmute. So right now, all attendees are muted. We've got the opportunity to unmute. So if you do want to be unmuted, just put that raise your hand option as we're in that question period, and then we'll be able to open up your mic to be able to speak. We've got a Q&A box, which many of you are going to be hopefully familiar with. We're asking for any of the questions that, you know, as a question comes up in the presentation, you're thinking, oh, I wonder how best to understand this, or I'd like to expand more on that. Write that question into the Q&A box. I'll be watching that Q&A box through the presentations. If there is anything that I think is really pressing to the understanding of the presentation, we'll interrupt our presenters, but otherwise a lot of them, they will have the time at the end of their presentation to be able to speak to that. And the chat box, with the exception of this introduction, so thank you again very much. If there's any technical issues or sound or the video's not working, please put that in the chat box, and I'll certainly be watching that chat box as well as we go through. We are recording this session, and the recording is going to be put up at the kettleriver.ca website, or you're also welcome to contact me, Christina Anderson with the Watershed Planner at rdkb.com. So our presentations, Lee was not able to get his video working. We worked fairly hard to try to make that happen, but weren't happening. So then we see a photo of Lee. So this was a selfie he took yesterday. And he's like, quick, I'll give you something. So this is Lee Hesketh. He's going to be our presenter for the second half of the presentation. The first half of the presentation is Jenny Coleshill and Barb Stewart, local biologists, very familiar with our riparian protection in this region. Years and years of the work, and I'm just excited to have both of everybody here sharing those, what works, why, what doesn't work, and just some of the changes and new ideas that they've come up with over the years. Before we start, I'm just gonna have a quick poll. One of the interesting parts for us is understanding who is in the boundary region. So yeah, so I just put a poll up, and if you're able to just check off and tell us whereabouts you're from in terms of the boundary, that would be great. We'll give it a couple of seconds here. It's also great for the presenters to understand, for Lee and Jenny and Barb, to be able to understand how many people are in from the boundary and how many people are from outside of the region. I know that Lee has been working throughout the whole province, so it's sort of neat to be able to see some of that on top of the chat box. I'll just give another 5 seconds here. Oh my gosh, we have almost full participation in this poll. We have 33 out of 35 people. And there we go. So that's really exciting. We have 48% of the people from the boundary region, which is great to see. So thank you very much. All right. On that note, I will pass this over to Barb.
All right, but you have to let me share the screen.
I know, I'm just looking at that. And the funny part about it asked me if I wanted to keep sharing something else. There you are. Thanks.
All right, I need it to, oh, I'm not seeing, just a moment. There we go. All right, so welcome everyone. It's so great to see so many people interested in riparian. This has definitely been a passion for me for a long time, and the other panelists as well. So I'm starting off, we're doing a joint presentation between Jenny Coleshill and myself. I'm starting off with the introduction to riparian, some of the issues we've faced here, and then Jenny's going to speak about some of the work we've been doing and our successes and failures and challenges that we've experienced. So this is just so anyone from outside the area, this is a picture of the Kettle River. We're very fortunate to have a river with no dams or anything. And we often, in many locations, we have healthy riparian, in other locations, not as healthy. I just want to go over what is riparian. You know, it all depends on the size of the stream. So in some of our larger systems or rivers, it can be as wide as 30 or 40 meters. Typically, we like to see trees and a mix of trees and shrubs in that zone. Those are going to help hold those banks and provide habitat for many species. Often there's managed areas within the riparian where people will, whether it's grazing, whatever that activity is, but still maintaining some of that structure there. And then often the riparian also includes some zones on the side, which may just be helping to filter water. If it's a small feeder stream, it may be as narrow as 6 meters, so it can be much smaller. An important term, just to make sure everyone's clear, is the difference between a high water mark. So the high water mark is that eroded edge where you know the water has scoured that edge, and sometimes it's below the natural boundary, which might be a bank. So there's different terms and different rules around high water mark versus natural boundary when doing riparian work. So a lot of you have probably already know about riparian zones and their value. I just want to talk about some of the importance here in the boundary. So there's a picture of high water mark, which in areas where it's fairly flat, it can be actually quite wide beyond the edge of the water. And it's usually distinct vegetation. So it's an eroded edge, some distinct vegetation, and then you'll see a vegetation change, and that indicates, upland areas. A lot of species that do depend on riparian. Here in the boundary, we're fortunate to have a pretty amazing trout fishery here. So we have rainbow trout, which are beautiful, as a picture down the bottom here. We have tiger salamanders, which are dependent on wetlands for parts of their life, and then grassland for the rest. We have a lot of water birds that use our river systems and lakes. We have the Lewis's woodpecker, which is something that's tends to live more in the southern part of BC. There are species that are dependent on cottonwood, riparian cottonwood, because they don't have that natural barrier where they can pound trees really hard. So they need soft trees to be able to make cavities, or they use cavities of other birds. So they're very dependent on the riparian cottonwood forest along our river systems. And this has been a focal species for a lot of the work Jenny and I have been doing, trying to enhance and improve habitat for the Lewis's woodpecker, which is a federally listed species. And there's many other species that depend on riparian, all the way from, perching birds to songbirds, insects that then feed our fish. It's just an amazing system when it functions. Nature is pretty amazing at developing these systems for wildlife. What we found in our region, as I'm sure has happened everywhere, is land use has impacted our riparian. People like to live near water, and often they like to have controlled manicured lawns. They'll take out trees so they have a view. Farming, they may want to expand their fields, and then they're farming closer to the edge. And over time, we've lost a lot of the riparian, certainly along our major river systems here, and along some of the feeder streams as well. And this has resulted in some problems, and it's taken time. It's taken 30 or 40 years before we've started to really see the erosive impacts of the loss of that riparian from land use. This is a picture actually of a road that was eroded, and they had to move the road over about 50 meters, I think, farther up, because it was lost due to a river. We have many examples of farming where livestock are able to come down close to water. They're causing erosion on the bank. A lot of the cottonwood's been removed. We might have some residual hawthorn, the odd cottonwood, and in places with slow channel flow, it's not on a big corner, these are sticking around for a while, but we're slowly losing these as well. So it's important to start reestablishing that thicker forest and the shrubs to help hold these banks. And we've definitely experienced some pretty serious flooding. This is an example where a log jam upstream diverted the river and it cut a new channel. And this farmer experienced some land loss. There had been really good riparian there, but the channel came through right on the edge of the riparian and the edge of the field, and it's been eroding his field since. Fortunately, on this site, the river is putting pressure on the other side of the bank, so that's been helpful. And in this case, we actually did planting farther back from the bank with the idea of getting riparian reestablished. We have some time because it's slow erosion. And how you approach restoration really depends on how much erosion is happening and how quickly things are happening. This is an example of just some natural erosion where the cottonwood tree was taken out actually was last spring. And that same year, we could see all the roots regenerating. So this is something that we've really wanted to embrace, is nature's way of fixing riparian. And that is, trying to encourage natural regen whenever possible. And I know Lee's going to definitely talk about some bioengineering techniques that he's been using, and Jenny as well, to try to restore some areas. But this is actually a picture of the Granby, where we have, some rivers have a lot of cobble and rock and they erode more slowly, whereas this is sand. So, this river moves rapidly. Every year the channels are changing. So that can really make a challenge in how you approach restoration, because you may be losing banks quickly or slowly. Just another thing that's really helped guide kind of some of our work is the velocity of water. Jenny kind of pointed this out to me and I'm like, wow, yeah, it's the velocity. A lot of people are afraid of flooding, but flooding actually doesn't cause a lot of damage unless there's a lot of water velocity. This is a picture of the flood in Rock Creek in 2018, a couple hours after the peak. So this flooded areas that hadn't been flooded since 1945. And so in this case, there was some trees along the edge of the river. In the background there is actual river. This is floodland. It all flooded through here, but that slowed the water down. And so we didn't see any channelization, no new channels were cut because those trees slowed it down. And then as it came out, it dropped a lot of sediment, it dropped a lot more debris, and it slowly moved back out into the river. And this again was like 2 hours after the peak. So this was like the kind of the peak of velocity. Farmers actually find value in allowing their land to flood, and it's such a benefit to others because if the river, we cannot contain it and we need to let it flood out and just minimize that damage. So having riparian vegetation, trees, shrubs will help to minimize that impact. This is what happens when you don't have riparian. Again, the 2018 flood. And this was where the channel cut. There was no cottonwood stand where the channel started to cut from the river. And it went across this large irrigated hayfield and it cut big channels, moved a lot of soil. And this past year, again, more damage was done because that riparian wasn't there. And ironically, on this property, there is a plan to reestablish that riparian, but it's been delayed because it can't be done until this hay lease is given up. So it may not happen for 10 years. And in the meantime, we're losing more land. So something Jenny, and I'm just kind of introducing Jenny here. So the Boundary Habitat Stewards, which is some professionals in the area that really care and want to see things happen and are actively trying to do improvement. These are some of the projects we've been working on. So Jenny's going to talk a bit about some bioengineering projects, trying to hold steep banks. One of our challenges has been grazing deer, browsing to the point where we're not seeing any natural regen. So fencing has been something we've been looking at. Staking, we've been working with cages, just trying to protect these trees because there's so many ungulates that are feeding on them. So that is actually the end of my part and introduction into Jenny and some of the work we've done over the last 5 or 6 years, working on trying to figure out what actually works for restoration here, because we're in a very hot, dry climate. And we found that what others are doing in other areas doesn't necessarily work here. So Jenny, I'm gonna stop sharing and let it go over to you.
Here we go. I'm actually going to try and turn off my video because my mouth and my voice doesn't match up because I'm exploring it. So it'll be distracting. So I'm going to stop my video and here we go. Come on. Presentation. Okay. So yeah, good morning, everybody. Great to have everybody here. Another Shadows in the world, and incredible biodiversity here. We've got east-west valleys, which contributes to that. Probably the only place, or it is the only place in the world where grizzly bears and rattlesnakes overlap. So we're very lucky. Yeah, I'm going to tell you about the last few years and our approach to restoration here and what we've been doing. And yeah, so just to go back to basics for a second, our approach is stewardship and ecosystem restoration. Stewardship is to improve human-environment interactions, and it starts from a young age. Why add the Dr. Seuss picture, right? And we incorporate that into our approach as well with schools. Ecosystem restoration. So an ecosystem is the assemblage of plants, animals, and microorganisms that work together as a unit in their physical environment. And restoration is a way to return a degraded ecosystem into its historic trajectory. And there's a lot of components to restoration. There's the ecological, economic, social, cultural, and political elements to it. So what was the question? To restore to what? So, you know, you look at your reference sites. Reference sites are places where there's little human activity and disturbance. So what would be there before humans were on the landscape potentially? We can also look to our focal species. So the Lewis's woodpecker, again, that's we're kind of using that critter as our umbrella species. So we focus on the habitat needs of the Lewis's woodpecker, which involves a lot of structural diversity and a nice healthy shrub underlayer. They love the hawthorn berries. So, you know, you focus on that and then you protect many more species because of the habitat work you're doing for that one. So a little bit of background, what led us into restoration work. We didn't just hit the ground. There was a little bit of planning and foundation work, which has been awesome to help direct us. So back in 2013, I think it was, I did a project with Canadian Wildlife Service, and we digitized cottonwood stands in the southern portion of the watershed. So from Kettle River Provincial Park to Grand Forks, kind of, in the more area where there's a lot of species at risk in the drier areas. So we used, we prioritized properties for conservation, restoration, and stewardship. We looked at a bunch of different variables, from presence of nesting birds to distance to tributaries, presence of wetlands, size of parcels, landowner willingness. There's a whole bunch of things that you could include in this. We also did the Kettle River Riparian threat assessment, and that really also lent support to focusing our work in this area of the watershed. We did some field work, and you know, it really pointed to where the urban and agricultural interfaces are really impacting the riparian areas, as opposed to the more, you know, the forest licensees and whatnot in those riparian areas. So, and also it's where all the species at risk are, or a lot of them, right, is in the southern portion. So in 2017, we began outreach work, and we sent out 100 letters, followed up phone calls, and whoever was willing, we did site visits. So during these site visits, we would identify potential nesting trees, ideas around mitigating threats to the riparian area, and just provide information. And if people were willing or wanted to go forward, that's when we would start writing restoration or stewardship plans, ideas, and then start trying to get funding to implement this stuff. So we had a good foundation to begin. Just really important, you need to consider all values. So this is a property where the flooding, I think that it lost about 30 feet of bank during the 2018 flood, and the power poles had to be moved. So there was an interest from the landowner to do some bank stabilization work. And it's on, you know, it's not a very strong outside bend, but it is some. But sometimes you just have to remember about all the values. Like, rivers move, they meander, it's the nature of a river. And on these outside bends, sometimes they're, you know, it's that place where you want to cast your fly to. They're the most productive places on the river for fish in the aquatic system. So, you know, we looked at doing some work here, and then also we noted that it was actually like a big bank swallow nesting site. If you look closely, you can see all the nesting holes in there. So these kind of areas are quite limited in the system. So you have to be careful where you're choosing to do this work. So we use a variety of methods in the actual on the ground restoration work, from dormant staking to planting rooted stock, and then we protect all our new plantings, and we even do a lot of just protecting mature trees from conflicts with beaver and whatnot, and also just using exclosures. But you know, especially on the private land work, the most important thing is that relationship with the landowner or land manager. And you know, we're lucky that we're so rooted here in the boundary, and we can create these long-term relationships with these people and support them through this kind of work. This is a site out towards Christina Lake, a high value site. It's upstream from tech conservation property, so it's adjoining riparian areas, making it, you know, continuous. There's rattlesnakes here. There's the Kettle River right there. So this is kind of what a site will look like, full of plants. Each plant's protected with individual caging, which can change that method, but that approach. So it protects from beaver, deer, and then we put cardboard down usually around each plant because there's such high competition with the ergonomic grasses that they really need that help. And then each plant is watered. We need to set up watering systems for each site. We have to water for at least 2 years because we have such hot, dry summers. This was another site that we have. This was just planted in the spring. Protection costs, there's so much. So we kind of use the strategy here to just stake the snot out of it and expect some mortality, but hopefully enough survive to get some vegetation growing. Of course, the beavers move in right away, love those little critters, but so we tried the strategy using the paint and the mixture of sand, and you coat each plant with it. And it did deter them pretty well, but we'll have to see at the end of winter how well the paint holds out. This is a spot at the Christian Valley where we also use some staking to revegetate, and this is a sprinkler system that we set up. So this landowner actually has water rights to the Kettle River, so we were able to put a pump in and draw right from the river. That is definitely not always the case. So watering is always a challenge, but this was an overhead sprinkler. Stakes do like to be kept moist above the ground as well. So we decided to go with this approach with the overhead sprinkler. We set it all up for the landowner, and then the landowner would come down and water once or twice a week. This is another site. So this is on the Kettle near Grand Forks, and we actually got involved with this initially. On the very top of bank is actually the Doukhobor Cemetery, and the bank was unraveling, and there's actually some graves at risk of being exposed. So the cemetery person, Pat Horkoff, he approached us and asked us for help. It didn't really fit into some of the project funding stuff to do with species risk and stuff, but we actually brought in David Polster, bioengineering guru, to do a course, and this was our test site. So that's why the vegetation only goes halfway up the bank, because you're always limited by capacity, resources, and funding. But we were able to continue on this spring. Actually, we tried to go up a little bit more, and we'll continue on. A lot of these projects you can't walk away from. You got to come back to and continue. But this picture to the left too was after the 2018 spring flood, so it did withstand all that water. And Christina, if you could play that video.
Can, yes. Okay, let me just, I'm gonna stop you from.
Oh, I have to stop.
Yeah, oh, great.
Okay.
Stop from sharing. I will get this up and I will get myself ready.
So as I was saying, restoration and whatnot, sometimes it's just about removing the threats or the thing that to allow the ecosystem to recover by itself. We're just kind of, setting out the recipe for it. And hopefully the plants and animals can do their thing after you set that scene. So this is just a quick 20-second video at one of our sites. We just put up, I think it was 10 by 10 or 10 by 15 meter exclosure fencing from deer. In Grand Forks, there's such high deer pressure. And of course, as a lot of large animals, they use riparian corridors for travel and for food. So all we wanted to do here was exclude the deer. And this was, I think, 2 years. 2 years it took. Almost there.
I know, this is interesting because it's showing on my computer, and for some reason I'm having a tough time showing it. And
I don't know if you shared your screen yet.
Well, I haven't, because it's not coming up as, Oh, there we go. I got it. It wasn't coming up as an option.
Okay. So you can see there is older mature cottonwoods here, but nothing was coming up.
Can you see the
that's
video?
why, yeah.
Okay, good.
It's not playing. Oh, here we go. Slowly playing. And then it starts panning to outside the fence, so you can see the difference. So I hope everyone could see that. I thought it was quite striking, right? Okay, I'll share my screen again. Yeah, so sometimes it's it only takes a little bit of methods to make the impact that you want to see. Now my computer's being funny. Come on. Oh, there we go. So yes, so we've also expanded from just doing private lands. We've started to get public lands and land managers on board. The Village of Midway has been watering a restoration site for the last few years. This is Grand Forks City Park. A few years back, they cut all the cottonwoods down and all the shrubs, and that bad manager at the time. I just have to say it's a bad manager, and now they are getting on board with the work we're doing. And on the right hand side is some planting work. We've littered that whole area now with rooted stock and caging, so it's a good public place as well to showcase it to the public. And they really got the people doing the planting got so many questions, so it's so great. So tons of challenges, of course, right? Like site conditions. This picture below is my son Caddis, and we're looking at an exclosure fence we did that came down in one of the high waters. Actually, we tried to put it up twice and it came down, but the fence, it was 200 meters down. We did another small exclosure fence and it withstood all the flooding. So it really matters about where you exactly are on the river, of course, and the different site conditions, if there's invasive species presence and the browse pressure and the access to the site. A lot of these sites are quite, far out there. So trying to get plant material there and the watering set up. Private lands, they're so dynamic and changing always. They change hands all the time, and you just hope the new owners will take on the work. The capability of the landowners, some landowners are so willing to do have the work done. They want it done, they get it, but they themselves can't do it. They're just maybe elder or whatever and can't help out. So access and availability of plants and materials. We go to Sagebrush and Oliver to get our plants because there's no native plant nursery here to get the numbers. Christina Lake Stewardship Society has started their own native plant nursery. So that's awesome that we kind of help out with and get plants from as well. Materials, sometimes they just aren't here. So things get put off and we got to wait for the extra time it takes things to get to the boundary, right? And cost is so prohibitive, but we're definitely, it drives our methods as well, trying to make, keep the costs down. So keeping track and monitoring, the Boundary Invasive Species Society with a summer student 2 years ago, I think, created we have a GIS online mapping database. So we track all of our sites. We can go out in the field with our GIS collector on our phones. We create polygons, and then we can input all the data into it with the size, what treatment we're doing, what kind of watering, what kind of when the monitoring was done. And it's a great way to track our success and failures and easily show data to the public and to funders. So I feel like we've, accomplished a bit, and since we've done, it's probably around 5,000 meters of restoration and or enhancements that we've done along the shorelines of the Kettle and Granby rivers. 100 landowners contacted via letter and phone. We've done over 45 site visits now. It might even be a bit more than that. And we've established partnerships with local governments and municipalities. We've engaged lots of the local schools and the public in the restoration work, which is always a challenge in volunteer work. You've really got to set it up right. Take a day or two to prep for volunteers coming. Sometimes it's even more work than not, but it's a great way to teach. And currently we have at least 5 landowners engaged in restoration work right now. But of course, there's a lot more to do. And we've had some great support. Have to give a shout out to our funding partners and appreciate it so much. And it just gives you when you get funding, it gives you the confidence and knowing that there's people out there that really appreciate the work you do, and gives you that motivation and inspiration to continue, right? Yeah, thank you. And that's my part.
Thank you very much, Jenny and Bart. That was fantastic. It's pretty exciting for me to see the amount of work that's been happening in the region, and so is the webinar, or sorry, is the link to the Riparian information, is that public or is that not?
It's not publicly available, but it can be shared out. And if you want access to it, we can certainly provide that, Christina.
It's pretty neat to see the changeover. So thank you very much, everybody. I've got a couple of questions that have been coming through the chat, and I remind people to feel free to put any of the questions into the question and answer box as well. So hopefully I haven't missed any. So we did get one question, and I think Jenny, you touched a little bit on this at the end there. How are you collaborating with other agencies to encourage riparian area restoration when those other agencies are reluctant and may not see the importance? And so that's probably could go to you. Well, really, I suspect this is going to be a question for Lee as well after your presentation. Does Jenny or Barb want to speak? So the question would be is when, how are you dealing with that the collaborating with other agencies when other agencies are reluctant or may not see the importance of riparian protection?
I would say that you just keep going. You just have to keep on providing the information to them, showing them the successes, showing them the literature. Like, come on, there's so much background literature on riparian protection, riparian health to the watersheds. They have to cooperate.
Anything to add, Barb? I like that they have to cooperate part.
Agree with Jenny. That's our approach, has been just keep asking, putting pressure on, finding different ways to encourage it, whether it's through neighbors who encourage a neighbor, whatever that is, to try to do it. And we've also been involved with the Kettle River Watershed Advisory Council. So our advisory committee, I think advisory council. Anyway, to try to encourage participation by others, make awareness, and try to gain support for that. So yeah, you just keep working at it. Don't give up if someone says no. That's kind of our motto, right, Jenny?
That's right. That's right.
I'd echo it. The biggest thing that I've learned through a lot of my research and engaging with a lot of people that have been working on this is that education and the awareness, understanding the importance, and really the importance is pretty wide, whether it's land protection for trying to reduce the erosion on your property versus habitat to water supply. There's just so much benefit to it. So it's understanding some of that awareness and thank you very much for having this webinar with us, so to help support that side of it. read a couple of more of the comments. I'm going to hold on some of the Q&A questions just at this point, because I'll let Lee set into his presentation before I address them. But CL throughout the presentation, it said that, oh, Jenny, you made a reference to saying that you are trying to do riparian protection before substantial human modification. Oh, sorry, CL, I've mixed up that. You're trying to restore it back to its natural environment. And that was your basis for a lot of the riparian protection. And I think CL was commenting, she thinks that you mean prior to substantial human modification rather than human occupation. So I think it was just, I think the specifics of restoring back to its natural state.
Right.
And yeah, so I think we'll move through. Thank you very much. And I know that we've got a couple more coming in, and I'll touch on this at the end. So one thing I forgot to mention is that Jenny, Barb, and Lee have all offered to stick around after the presentation, after 11:30, just if there's any more outstanding questions or to be able to talk about some of the specifics with the presentation. And I know that Riparian, there's a lot of varieties, so many different benefits that it can sometimes be tight for answering all the questions. So they have offered to stick around after the presentation. So I will move this over to Lee Hesketh. And so Lee is a program manager for Farmland Riparian Interface Stewardship Program, works with BC Cattlemen's, and has been, like I said, working in the riparian protection field for 35 years. We did have a problem with Lee's video. So I've got a photo of Lee that he managed to pull off a selfie from yesterday. So we showed that at the beginning, and I'll share that photo at the end as well. So sorry about that. And on that note, Lee, I will pass this over to you.
Thanks, Justina. Hey, I'm trying to share my screen. I go up and I don't have my presentation available.
So have you got it open on your computer?
I've got here.
So the one thing I definitely found is that you need to close the share box.
It's opening up right now. Open it on my own personal computer. No problem. Sorry about that.
Well, and I can also run it. Just say the word.
It's not bringing up here.
You know what? I'll run it.
Sure.
That's no problem at all.
I knew this was going to happen.
Redundancy.
Here. Maybe this is.
On the side
There it is. Did that just open up for you?
It didn't yet.
No.
I'm trying to make sure that I'm not sharing.
Okay, well, maybe do it up on yours. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Okay, I'm just gonna set that up.
Where'd it go?
And sometimes it takes a little while for.
Where'd it go? Anyways, I'll get started on my talk and that will pop up. I've been asked to provide some words of wisdom on my perceptions or wisdom on riparian management. My wisdom or perception is based on my experience and personal background. And I think that has a huge influence on where I come with this. To start with, I was born and raised on a cattle ranch in the North Okanagan that we had 5 kilometers of river to deal with that bordered the ranch. I was born, the ranch itself is located 8 kilometers in on a road aptly named Shoeshop River Drive, or River Road, as known to the locals. And I used to have not only snow days, but I used to have river days, because every spring in June, we used to usually miss 1 or 2 weeks of school because quite literally, we had River Road. And so, yeah, I go a long ways back dealing with rivers and flooding and issues. Move forward, the fact that my parents, living where we did, they were early adapters. They recognized that while we had landowner rights, we also had responsibilities. And so because of we're located out across from the community of Cherryville, and we're right on the border between the Monashee Mountains and the Okanagan. The biodiversity on our ranch was fairly substantial, and so even back in the 60s, my family was doing studies with the different ministries coming out, and either I got the opportunity to go out and collect deer manure, or we're looking at transplanting the salmon above the falls. So I got to go out with the biologists when they're releasing salmon during the transplants and stuff like this. And so I had a really, how do you put it, unique opportunity to be involved from a young age. Again, that's really changed my perception on what I do today. Move forward, early 20s, I was a jack of all trade. I did logging, I did forestry tech work. Like I said, anything to pay the bills. And I imagine a lot of you that live in the rural communities understand and appreciate that you have to be, how do you put it, a jack of all trades. So anyways, come along to the 1980s, mid 80s, I actually got, because of my background and my people I knew from environment, I actually got offered a job to run a labor crew of a bunch of manpower misfits. This is back in the 1980s. So these guys couldn't get UI, but they all had unique abilities. And so I got to run this kind of crazy crew of misfits doing restoration work. And this is when the restoration work was first coming in. So I had the opportunity to basically work with engineers, biologists, geomorphologists. They would come and basically say what they wanted us to build. And my job was to basically take their ideas and make it happen, which was a great opportunity because, basically for about 10, 15 years, I got to play. And because I don't have the letters behind my names, I don't have to be accountable. And really what we're dealing with is bioengineering and the first early stuff. So I'll get you to switch over. Next slide, please. And so back in 2000, I was able to turn this into a situation where the Department of Fisheries and Oceans basically had funding to partner up with different commodity groups and stewardship groups doing, basically trying to build capacity around environmental stewardship. And so fortunately, the BC Cattlemen's Association were early adapters, knew of my work and hired me on. And so the Farmland Riparian Interface Stewardship Program commenced in 2000. And basically you can see on the screen here is that the big priority was me to work with both the ranching community so that the ranchers and the agriculture sector better understood government and government regulations and what they were all about, and vice versa. Because of my background with the ranching sector and agriculture, I was able to work with government trying to explain why those crazy ranchers and farmers out there are doing what they do. And my goal with this is to find common ground, and somewhere in between, there's the answers. Switch over. And so, of course, in my role, I came to understand that the government, to protect us from ourselves, have a whole bunch of rules and regulations, but often come in conflict, especially in the rural areas where, between us being loggers, miners, and farmers and ranchers, we want to manipulate the land, creeks and the rivers. And how do you put it? If there's one thing I want you to take home today is the fact that don't try to screw around with Mother Nature. She's going to beat you every time. That's the take home. And so the one thing I want to, and we'll switch over here quickly to the next slide. What I like to, I'm going to go through these slides quickly, and just to emphasize how silly us as humans are and how smart we think we are, we keep on coming up with these great ideas that don't work. So if you switch back to the first one, you can see 1800s, we're giving away cocaine for tooth drops. That's when dentists used to actually be popular. Next one, turn of the century. You used to actually give away beer, for Christ's sake, and promote beer for young mums to drink. I don't think that's flying today. Switch to the next one. Yeah, we're moving up to the 1930s, 1940s. We had actually Coke. and pop being promoted for young kids. Again, the dentists love this. Let's go to the next one. How's this for good advertising? And what we have to understand, and what I'm trying to make you guys understand, is that we as humans, we thought this was okay at that time. This is what society thought was norm. Switch her over to the next one. We're advancing, aren't we? So let's go up to the next one. And I mean, this is how crazy it is we as humans actually think this was like the norm. Switch to the next one. Yeah, you know, when cigarettes used to be pretty cool at one time. So on that note, these next things are very similar. And these are all situations, I'm going to show these photos that were created because us as humans thought we were going to be really smart and basically tame things. Let's roll them. That's the first one. So this is a site out in Lumbee, and this is a huge big cut bank. And same thing, you can see the landowner here, he did a bunch of riprapping downstream. When it came to this big cut bank here, he got turned down. Originally, there was actually a road along the base of this bank here. And then of course, it started eroding, he couldn't get access. And so his answer was he piled loads of rock on top of the big bank. And of course, when the thinking that it would stabilize the bank when it fell in. So really what it did was launched into the river when things were eroding. And of course, it created more erosion and more erosion. Next site. This is over in Enderby area. Again, just a small little creek. If you look where those willows are, that's where the creek is. And of course, everybody along this little tiny creek system have basically moved in. And all of a sudden, 2017, we found out why they shouldn't have done that, because basically every culvert in the system was undersized and the creek went everywhere and flooded out a lot of garages and houses. Again, just a little bit of respect for the creek would have went a long ways. Next slide. I love throwing this slide in. This is up in the Kispiox. This old truck was parked over in the trees along the Riparian corridor at one time, and the only thing that saved it from going down the river with a few outbuildings and things like that was the fact that the tree was growing up through the engine well. But rivers move, and we have to expect that. And so, yeah, if you have precious things along the riverbank, don't leave them there. And of course, we're always building bridges. This is a bridge up on the Mud River out of Prince George. This picture was taken about 2 days before the bridge went out. Of course, we're always trying to cross rivers. The challenge with it, of course, is that bridges are expensive, and we're always trying to find the narrowest spots and put in the narrowest bridges. The challenge what I'm finding was this bridge was actually put in the 1950s, and it was actually a government bridge, believe it or not. And the one old timer says, well, of course it's big enough. The government put it in. They wouldn't put too small a bridge in. And I'm going, it was put in the 1950s. They did the best they could, but it didn't mean they did the right size. And this is the challenge we face with river systems, is the river we knew yesterday isn't going to be the river we know tomorrow. And of course, we put buildings right beside the river because that's a nice place to be. But when the river started eroding and taking banks away, things like this happen. And of course, we have risk of losing the barn. This is just downstream of where that bridge was located, by the way. Next slide. This is actually over in Ashton Creek, over in the Enderby area. And the challenge what we have with these systems here is that, again, they're flash type systems. And for some reason, us humans have decided that we want to put trailer parks. Any place we have a good, nice system that blows apart, we decide that, well, no, we can't put a house there, but we can put a mobile home because it's mobile. And of course, then you have these situations that occur where the things flood and stuff, and nobody wants to move their mobile for some reason because they're not mobile anymore. They're houses. And so this is the challenge we face is, well, I feel bad, but here's a bad joke. Is I was dealing with the Lower Nicola area, and of course we have tons of house trailers all developed in that area. And I was attending a watershed meeting. I got asked my thoughts on it. And of course, my inside voice spoke out. And I said, what do divorces and flooding have in common in the lower Nicola? And I said, somebody's losing a trailer. I know that's a bad joke, but I'm serious. It's the way it is. And when you have a trailer park flood 3 out of 10 years, do you think we should keep the trailer park there or should we move it? Next slide. This is Kingfisher Interpretive Center slide that happened over the Enderby Way. And this is what happens when somebody up above a small lake system wanted to keep the lake from winter freezing. So the report from forest practices was they figured that somebody actually went and stuck, used plywood and plugged off the culverts, thinking they'd be able to manage this little lake a little bit better. But what happened is nobody went up and took the boards out. And so high flows in the springtime had this basically man-made small little dam blow out and become a torrent event, basically wiping out the Maple Lake Road and putting the Kingfisher Interpretive Center totally at risk here. There was basically the road to Maple Lake was blocked off, I think, for 5 days. And, you know, the cost, and luckily nobody lost their lives here, but you can see just a little human, you know, somebody wanted to keep a few fish there and thought it was a really good idea to throw plywood in a culvert. Results. Oh, next slide. This is over in your guys' area. This is on the Slocan River. I don't know if you can see towards the bottom of the picture, there's some lumber and things like this. Believe it or not, right above this slide was a house located. And of course, they put their septic field down over the bank, not thinking they would have anywhere. It's nowhere as close to the river. And Great Lake, you know, they had a great view. So they, I believe, had cleaned off some of the timber off so they had a better view of the river and things like that. Well, guess what? Mother Nature came back to tell them that they shouldn't be living where they were living. Next photo. My job in the middle of May and June, everybody's screaming that, come and hold my hand, I'm drowning. I got water everywhere. Come July, everything goes quiet for about 2 weeks. And then in middle of July through August, everybody phones me and says, where the hell's my water? I have no water left. So this is the results we're finding in a lot of systems is, A, we're overprescribed. Because of the instability in the systems, we're having bed load come down and fill up these small creek systems. So while the water is there running under this gravel, it's not available, A, to the farmers that perhaps want to use it for agriculture, but more importantly, the fish and the biodiversity that lives within the creek system is totally gone. And this is what gets me sometimes is everybody goes, well, you know, it only dried up for a couple of days. Well, I'm sorry to say, you run out of water or food for a few weeks in comparison, and it doesn't matter. You're not there. It doesn't exist anymore. Next slide. And of course, this is down in your area. This is the boundary. Again, your classic land clearing, wanting to make hay fields out of riparian corridors. And when the systems go wild, we lose things. And next slide. Okay, this is what happens when we do land clearing. This is up north in Quesnel, where gentlemen, they cleared a bunch of bench area, had few little ephemeral streams, which means these little creeks only ran for, you know, maybe a week in the springtime. So they thought they'd put 2 of them together and just run them through, you know, forget the riparian corridor, we'll just run them over a bank and we'll make sure this flume here works. That'll be lots of capacity. Well, take a look at the next slide. This is the results. This is just, you know, somebody clearing about a 20-acre field and thought they could manage things a little bit better. But this is what we do when we make mistakes. Next slide, please. So, like I said, I'm in the ranching sector. Some people call, oh, I'm that damn guy that I'm the turncoat that's went over to the green side. And vice versa, when I go into the environment sector, they look at me and go, oh, you're that goddamn rancher. Well, I like to call myself a realist. And this is kind of my motto. The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change. The realist adjusts the sails. And that's my motto in how I approach things. So I'm going to show you some quick before and afters of stuff that I've worked on. just to show you that if we work with Mother Nature, the results we can get, and it's pretty simple to deal with. Next slide, please. I'll go real quick here. This is a picture, 1998, of Bazette Creek. Like a lot of our systems, a lot of bed load moving in the system. You can see the creek end up in some sections here actually bed loading, and the channel itself was moving around over about a 50, 60, 70 meter section as it hit the basically bottom lower area of the floodplain. So what we did is, instead of going in and just trying to rock things straight up, actually all through here I took debris and stuff, and we basically created man-made debris jams so that we can actually use the energy of the system during freshet to blow through, and we're kind of dictating where the energy is going to go, or the thalweg. And what we're doing is letting Mother Nature, instead of us having to dig all this material out, letting it flush through itself. So the next picture is basically about 15 years later. And we can see how much the channel, the creek itself, has actually deepened. The capacity is there. The corridor is coming back, and the riparian is coming back. And so even if it does inundate and go outside its banks now, it's got something on that gravel to actually start catching now the sand and material. So we're in the middle of recovery on this page. Next slide. I'm talking about biodiversity. So this is what I do. This is one of my early experiments, quite literally, where I built a debris jam in the middle of the channel. And this is not using any rock whatsoever. It's just using debris slash and playing on the gravel bars. And so next slide, after a couple of years, we can see that basically the material has taken hold. We've incorporated willows into the structure, and basically, again, we're narrowing up that channel and allowing the riparian corridor to come back and establish itself. Next slide. This is biodiversity totally. This is a creek system, the Bazette system. During freshet, it's just about top of bank. Along these banks, so the riparian corridor had been totally lost. And so we went back, and quite literally in these nice sandy banks, we vibrated all this ugly debris slash in on it, and then incorporated a whole bunch of willows, large cuttings in this. We were actually planting 5, 6, 8-inch pieces of willow into this bank here. And then we fenced the corridor, of course. And the next photo, within 3 years, we have this already. And of course, that's again using large Pacific willows. They're cheap, fast, effective, but again, you have to be careful where you use them, because it depends on what results you want. A lot of small systems, these big willows like this, will choke it out after a few years. And while you have vegetation cover, you'll end up choking systems and creating more problems. So you got to think long-term when you're thinking about what you're designing and what you're wanting to achieve when you're repairing corridor health. Next slide, please. Oh, this is Joe Rich Creek going up just before the turnoff to Big White Ski Hill. And this is an old long-time ranch. The rancher would bring his cattle down every fall, and he would basically overwinter in this bottom area. And of course, you can see there's no riparian corridor whatsoever. So, oops, sorry, I hear not hearing me. I'll speak up. So anyways, this is Joe Rich. We can see that it's heavily impacted by livestock. A partnership between the Environmental Farm Plan and the Regional District of Central Okanagan, the Okanagan Water Board, everybody kind of pitched in on this, and we fenced it, and I went through and I was able to stabilize basically 1.5 kilometers the system. And so next slide, we can see what happens just within 3 years of protecting this system. And this is the same photo, same location, you can see the results. A quick anecdote on this was that Okanagan College has one class going up there and studying and keeping this thing going. Well, I got a phone call after about 3-4 years, and they were really concerned because they figured the cattle had been back in there damaging the riparian corridor the previous winter. When I went up there and took a look, what it was is we had moose had come down and basically had been in that whole area all through the winter. So it wasn't cows, it was quite literally, we were bringing the biodiversity back. It was the moose that had basically went in there and did all the damage. So yeah, it's build it and they will come. Next slide. This is a little side channel out the Maple Lake Valley, down past Lumbee. This here was a remnant channel that ran through the one field pasture area. The rancher was wanting to fill it in because, of course, midsummer, all it was a mosquito haven, stranded water. And DFO were looking at this, and they're going at the fact that they were ending up with tons of stranded fish in here as well. And so what we did, though, is instead of filling it in, we worked with the rancher and we actually reintroduced flows into the side channel under a control system. And so what we did, next slide, please, is we actually transplanted, dug it out, transplanted along it, fenced it, put a secondary fence in so the rancher actually has more management control of his grazing. And that's the results just after 2 years. And the cool thing with this is that now that that creek is flowing through, we've actually reduced the mosquito population because that creek is now a living creek with fish in it versus just a bog and a swamp. This is just outside of Lumbee. This is one of my first projects I ever worked on. This shows the Duto Creek flowing in along the highway here. I went through and my first project, I worked on refencing all this corridor. And I used to take out high school students and use them for cheap labor, and we planted up the Riparian corridor. But this next photo makes me feel old because you can see that, how do you put it? Things have grown up. I have trees quite literally touching hands over the top of the creek. It just shows you that given time, things can change. Next slide. And back to, remember that big cut bank that I showed you in one of the original photos about that guy, the engineer, put the big bunch of rock on top of the bank? Well, he sold the place to another gentleman. The guy came in and he was bought and sold used equipment. And he said, I got equipment, can we fix this? And so quite literally, I partnered up with some of their neighbors because, believe it or not, there's a property post right on top of that bank there that if this goes back any farther, it's changing. All three landowners are losing a bit of property. And so quite literally, we got the local neighborhood, everybody got interested in solving this issue. And so I take pride in the fact that this here site, while I've worked on it 3 different times, we haven't had a huge investment. A lot of it is in-kind inputs to put this together. In fact, we actually traded buffalo meat, firewood, low bedding time, excavator time. It was just people working together, exchanging goods, and we've got the results. And flip her over to the next page. And so that's what it looks here last year. We've actually been able to totally naturalize and stabilize the bank. And the cool thing is that when I designed my work, people ask me, well, what are you trying to achieve? And it's really simple. You just make really good fishing holes. And so if you're a fisherman, you know where you're going to be fishing is down in that nice log jam at the base of the bank. Next picture, we'll give another angle on it. This is the first picture you guys seen, and you can see what it looks like now. Next slide. So it takes time. And like I said, I've been at this business for quite a while, so I've had time. But the rewarding thing is that we can do this. We can put our watersheds back together, but there has to be a will, and we got to stop trying to think we're going to beat up on Mother Nature. Next slide. For me, being rural, it's getting other people to understand us. To quote Waylon Jennings, we're not wrong, we're just different. Being a rancher, like I said, our values are far different than somebody in town owning a house and basically flipping their property every 5 years to gain cash. Us out on the land base are living there, taking care of our land. And so this is what I do to try to educate other people is I do a biodiversity tour where I welcome the ranching community, agriculture community, the environmental sector, anybody, government. I've had the Rural Liberal Caucus come out to my tour. I've had a retired fisheries minister, and all, when you get them on common ground, we can get that discussion going, that we understand that, there's not another place for us to jump off to on this. We're on this little green planet together. So next slide, those are my two youngest kids, and that's what it's all about. That was, oh God, 20 years ago, 20 or more years ago. So that's what I do it for, is that it's not me, it's our next generations. And how do you put it? Right now, we're at a time that we actually can make a difference. And so it's kind of exciting. So thank you very much. I'll be around for any questions or answers, and I'll turn it back to Christine. You're muted still.
Yeah, I just saw that. I was trying to move all my stuff to get to the mute button. Thank you very much, Lee. That was fantastic. I know I have quite a few questions between the three presentations. I really appreciate you sharing this information, and there's definitely a lot of some of the comments of the past ideas. I've seen them on the landscape, and it's certainly an interesting one when people also make sites that are good to the 200-year event, but then we keep seeing these events that are exceeding that level. So yeah, working with Mother Nature, I see the point for sure. I'm going to touch in. Thank you very much. We've had a couple of questions that have come through. So I'll go to the Q&A box first. And so I'll open this up to Jenny, Barb, and Lee. And as you're speaking, what I'll do, Lee, is I'll go back to my PowerPoint presentation and I'll put up that photo again so that people can see who they're talking to. So, so the first question was, have you learned which deer fencing material works best to prevent browsing? What would you recommend to other projects?
Jen, you want to tackle that one?
Oh. I'll take it first. So it depends, right? It all depends, of course, your proximity to the river and what kind of flows you're dealing with. But we've had a lot of success planting very close to the river with, depending on your snow level as well, but either 4 foot to 6 foot, the 2-inch by 4-inch multi-mesh fence, it's called. I'm getting all this lingo right with the suppliers and the retailers and exactly what fence is called, but it's called multi-mesh. And yeah, depending on your snow load and how much snow there is, depending on what height you want, from 4 feet to 6 feet. And then the exclosure fencing we used was, I think I ended up ordering this one from Ontario because it was like the cheapest and biggest ones I could find, which I usually don't do. We usually buy very local, but it was 6 foot 10x fencing, it's called. It's plastic, and then we just used rebar posts and then some grippling tools and guide wire at the top. But I would make those, if you're going for the bigger exclosures, I would cap your area. You know, there's challenges when you make large exclosures. The Midway site we've been working on, Moose likes to run through that fencing quite often. And yeah, it depends on the flows and what kind of debris your water's bringing in. Anyone else want to add?
We did a bunch of research back in the 1990s with Ministry of Agriculture on trying to keep white-tailed deer out of orchards. And so deer hair is actually hollow, and so it's really well insulated. So we quite literally were playing around with electric fencing, and hate to say it, it doesn't work. We were having highly, how do you put it, 6 inches apart high tensile wire, positive, negative, and a really high energy system, as well as strobe lights. And quite literally, the deer were coming up, jumping through the fence, staggering around because of the effects of the shock, and still going and eating the bait. What we came up with is basically page wire was the only way you're going to stop them.
And just to add to that, when Jenny had mentioned the exclosure fencing, be really cautious about using that in the zone that might flood. She had
Yes.
some success on a couple spots where the flow was not enough to take out the fencing, but we lost like 300 meters of fencing one year. And, you know, we were well above the normal flood zone. We were well above the high water mark, but that was that excessive flood year. And we managed to salvage some of it because it was still attached to a tree, you know, 100 meters downriver. But, you know, you really got to think about your flow when you're thinking about fencing. And fencing is expensive. We have kind of moved towards more of the cage style, even though it's more expensive, because we have both the problem with beaver and with deer. So, you know, if we have that high 10x fencing, you know, the 6-foot fencing is a perimeter fence, the challenge becomes, so after about 5 or 6 years, you know, your root stock's probably big enough. You probably don't need to have that big fencing and maintain that fencing every year. But then what about the beaver? So we've kind of moved back towards the more expensive option of that multi-mesh fencing as cages around when we're using planted stock, but that doesn't necessarily work for the staking. And I've heard mixed results on the electric fencing. So there's another practitioner out in the West Kootenays who's had some decent success with using electric fencing, but I don't know if it's been against white-tailed deer so much on it. So anyway, yeah, really think about your options, and it's a challenge picking out the right type of fencing, and it's expensive.
The one thing I've went back to, and we've been working here with the cattlemen and the range officers on our permitted range on using obstacle placement, or, you know, basically woody debris placement along our creek corridors. And I know a lot of people in small semi-urban areas, I guess, like their creeks all nice and clean, and then throwing old logs and debris along the creek corridor often doesn't look good, but the reality is it certainly helps and can work as a really cost-effective buffer. And it actually enhances, when you're trying to establish brush along the riparian corridor, having that shade cover and stuff like that, so that woody debris actually plays a really key role in jump starting things, I guess is the best word for it.
Yeah, we have a project where we actually are planning to bring in logging truckloads of cottonwood to start placing debris and then plant in it to see how effective it is against beaver. But we didn't get it in this year. The site was too wet to get trucks into, so maybe next year we'll try that project. But yeah, it's a great idea using obstacle planting and coarse woody debris to make natural barriers, because then you don't have to maintain it. Anytime you put a fence in, you have to maintain it. You have to clean it out each year from the flood debris. And yeah, if you can put in obstacles and coarse woody debris as your fence, that is so much better.
Especially leaving the branches on, because you got to think about yourself that most ungulates or animals, when they're reaching down, they're trying to eat the grass. And so if they have stuff back up in their face, like branches and stuff, they don't like that either. They're like us. They take on the easiest route, the easiest source often. So you get some deterrence there, and it'll stop them. The other big thing I see, especially around livestock grazing, is the fact of making sure that you're not overgrazing. That's the challenge we have often. Doesn't mean you can't graze riparian corridors, but making sure you don't overgraze. That's the key.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I guess I had a question. So in terms of picking the stock, so you're talking about the size of stock, saying sometimes you purchase it's cuttings. How do you come up with determining the stock for a specific site?
Not easy. Budget plays into it, whether or not you can afford to buy woody or rooted stock or not. It seems to be less expensive using stakes, but they're a lot more work and labor to get in the ground. And you know, we've had limited, we really have to, in our hot, dry system here, we have to water it or it will not root. It's very difficult to get things just dry out too fast here. You might have very different results with stakes in northern climates that are not, you know, they don't reach 40 degrees in the summer. Rooted stock, the younger the better is kind of a rule. You know, 1 to 2 year old stock is a good idea, a little less expensive. Definitely will avoid root bound plants. You know, sometimes you get a good deal and, oh, they have some leftover from last year. Well, if it's too root bound, it might not survive very well. It really depends on your budget, you know, what your site's like. We've had poor success in like wetland sites with staking where there's not enough oxygen there, or there's too much reed canary grass and you're not getting the root development. So in that case, using rooted stock, we actually managed to get plants coming there, whereas staking completely failed on that site. But whereas if you're on better oxygenated sites, or sites where you can actually get down to the water table, staking's really good. It really depends. It's site specific. Sorry, I can't say more, Christina. And I'm sure Jenny and Lee might have more comments on that too.
The one thing I always
Sometimes-
recommend, sorry?
No, you go first, Lee.
Okay, the one thing I'm always, because I have people that want to plant trees. And I say, you know what? Start off with planting, especially if you're going to plant, say, conifers, start off with 5, 10 trees at the most. Don't go to a nursery, buy like 500, 1,000 seedlings and go out and try to think you're going to change the world. Because what'll happen is the seedlings will die. You'll spend 2 weekends planting out in the middle of a hot summer that your friends were at the weekend enjoying themselves, and you're out there becoming a tree planter. And then you turn around, they'll all die. Focus on having 5 trees that maybe buy and